Story 1 by Knocking the Lantern Room. A few years ago, I worked as a maintenance man for the Coast Guard. I wasn't a full-time keeper, but I'd occasionally be sent to old lighthouses along the East Coast to do repairs or stay overnight if the assigned keeper needed time off. One of these assignments was to an isolated lighthouse just off the coast of Maine. The place was ancient, built in the 1800s, with winding stone stairs, small living quarters, and a lantern room at the very top that overlooked the endless ocean. The first night, it was eerily silent, except for the sound of waves slamming against the rocks. Around midnight, I heard something that froze me in place. 3 slow knocks, echoing from the lantern room above me. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind or loose glass, but the sound was heavy, deliberate, like knuckles on wood, and I was the only one inside. I used to work for the Coast Guard as a maintenance man. I wasn't a full-time lighthouse keeper, but I would sometimes be sent to cover shifts when the assigned keeper needed time off. That usually meant staying overnight in places most people never see, isolated lighthouses along the East Coast. Some of them were beautiful, others were unsettling. One of my assignments was to a lighthouse off the coast of Maine. It was one of the oldest still standing, built in the 1800s. It looked like something out of a painting. But the moment I arrived, it gave me a strange feeling. Cold, lonely, like the walls themselves had been watching people for over a century. The structure was tall and narrow. The stone steps spiraled all the way to the lantern room. Inside, there were small living quarters with a cot, a desk, and bare essentials. Everything smelled like damp salt water and old wood. The sound of the waves outside was constant, slamming into the rocks below. That night, the silence in between waves felt louder than the ocean itself. No cars, no voices, it's just me. Every so often, I thought I heard the faintest tapping somewhere in the lighthouse, but when I paused and listened, the sound would vanish. Maybe it was just settling, or maybe I wanted to believe that. Around midnight, I sat on the edge of the cot, trying to read under a small lamp. That's when I heard it. A sound that made me stop cold. 3 slow knocks. They echoed down from the lantern room above me, heavy, hollow, and deliberate. At first, I didn't even move. I just sat frozen, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The knocks weren't frantic. They weren't random. It was spaced out, like someone was standing on the other side of a door, knocking politely to be let in. I told myself it had to be something else. Maybe the wind had slammed something loose. Maybe a seagull or bird had gotten trapped near the glass panes. But deep down, I knew that sound. It was knuckles on wood, nothing else. And I was the only one inside, or at least, I thought I was. Would you have gone upstairs? Or would you have stayed put, pretending nothing happened? My heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to calm myself down. I told myself this was just part of the job. Old buildings make noises. Things creak. The ocean wind is strong, but I couldn't shake the image of someone waiting up there. The spiral staircase loomed in front of me. Every step looked darker than the one before it. My flashlight beam wobbled as my hand shook. I hesitated, staring up into the shadows. The knocking had stopped, but was that better or worse? I started climbing. Each footstep creaked against the stone steps. The sound echoed up and down the hollow tower. My breathing felt too loud, like I was giving myself away to something that was waiting. Halfway up, I stopped. The silence was crushing. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No wind. Just a dead stillness inside the lighthouse. That was somehow more terrifying than the knocks themselves. What if someone was up there? Someone hiding, watching me climb toward them? I pushed myself higher, step after step, until I reached the lantern room door. The old wooden frame was locked shut with an iron latch. I pressed my hand against it. It was solid, secure. Nothing could have come in. So I lifted the latch, opened the door slowly, and stepped inside. My flashlight beam cut across the glass panes. The lantern room was empty. No one was there. Only the faint rattling of loose glass in the wind. I let out a shaky laugh, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The knocks must have been from the storm outside. Maybe the structure shifting, maybe nothing at all. But the hair on the back of my neck wouldn't settle. Something was wrong. Because if it was just the storm, why did the knocks sound so human, so intentional? I stood there, staring out at the endless black ocean. The waves crashed violently below. My reflection in the glass looked pale, distorted in the faint glow of the lantern glass. Then I noticed something I can't explain. For just a split second, I thought I saw another reflection standing behind me. With a flashlight in hand, I climbed the spiral staircase. Each step creaked under my boots, and the knocks seemed to stop the moment I got closer. When I finally reached the top, the lantern room was empty. The glass panes rattled faintly in the wind, but there was no sign of anyone. I checked the door, the locks, everything, all secure. Trying to shake it off, I went back downstairs. But an hour later, the knocks returned. This time, they weren't on the lantern room door. They were right outside my quarters. 3 knocks, slow, heavy. I whispered to myself, it has to be my imagination. But then, the doorknob turned just slightly. I remember gripping the flashlight so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to start climbing the spiral staircase. The stone steps felt damp under my boots, slick from years of ocean air. Every creak from the metal railing echoed like a gunshot in the hollow tower. The further I went, the quieter the lighthouse seemed to get. Even the sound of the waves outside felt muted. It was as if the whole building was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would find. My breathing grew louder in the silence, shaky and uneven. Would you have kept climbing, or would you have turned around and locked yourself in the quarters? The knocks had stopped by the time I reached the halfway point. That almost made it worse. I kept glancing upward, expecting to see a shadow move at the top of the stairs. But all I saw was darkness. The beam of my flashlight was weak, barely cutting into it. When I finally reached the lantern room door, I hesitated. The old wooden frame stood tall in front of me, the iron latch glinting faintly in the light. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Not even the faintest rattle. I lifted the latch slowly, and the sound of the metal scraping against itself made my chest tighten. The door groaned as I pushed it open. My flashlight swept across the glass panes. The room was empty. Empty, but not still. One of the cracked panes rattled faintly in the wind. The sound was soft, irregular, almost like a whisper. I moved closer, checking every corner. My light fell on the old lantern itself, rusted and covered in dust. The smell of oil lingered in the air, even though it hadn't been used in decades. What had I heard? What had knocked so hard it carried down the tower like thunder? I circled the room again, shining the beam across every inch of glass. My reflection looked back at me, pale and wide-eyed. For a moment, I thought I saw another reflection, just behind mine. But when I turned, the space was empty. Was someone hiding in here with me? Or was it just my nerves making me see things that weren't there? I checked the locks. Everything was sealed tight. The door to the balcony was secured with a rusted bolt that had been touched in years. No one could have come inside. I stood there for a long moment, listening. Nothing but the low whistle of the wind. Eventually, I forced myself back down the spiral staircase. My legs felt heavy, but at the same time, I wanted to move quickly to get away from that room. Each step groaned under my weight, echoing as if the lighthouse itself was following me. When I reached my quarters again, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I had imagined the knocks, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. The sound was too clear, too human, and I sat on the cot and stared at the door for what felt like hours. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been just on the other side of that lantern room, waiting, watching. Was I really alone in that lighthouse? An hour must have passed when the sound came again. 3 knocks, slow, heavy, but this time it wasn't above me. It was right outside my quarters. My chest tightened instantly. Time. I stared at the door, frozen in place. The knocks were spaced out, like whoever was there had all the time in the world. They weren't frantic. They weren't weak. They were calm, controlled. I whispered to myself, it has to be the wind. It has to be. But the words sounded weak, even to me. Then, the doorknob turned. It was subtle, just a small twist. But I saw it. The metal handle shifted, rattled ever so slightly. Someone, or something, was trying to come in. Would you have called out, or stayed silent, hoping it would go away? I didn't move. My entire body locked up as I watched that knob twitch again, like a hand was testing it. The air in the room felt colder. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I thought about grabbing the lamp from the desk and using it as a weapon, but my hands refused to move. I just sat there, my breath shallow, my eyes locked on the door. The knocking didn't return, only the handle, turning, pausing, turning again, as if whoever was outside wanted me to know they could come in whenever they wanted. What was waiting for me on the other side of that door? And then, it stopped. The handle stilled. The silence was worse than the noise. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept staring, waiting for the sound again, but nothing came. Finally, I whispered out loud, "Who's there?" No answer, just the creaking of the lighthouse as the wind howled outside. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been standing right there, inches away, trying to get inside my room. And I had no idea if they were still standing in the hallway. I didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, I called the senior keeper and told him what happened. He was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You heard him, didn't you?" I asked what he meant, and he explained that in the late 1800s, a keeper had fallen from the lantern balcony and died instantly on the rocks below. Since then, anyone who stayed overnight alone in the lighthouse would hear 3 knocks at their door. Some say it's him asking to be let back inside. That was the last time I ever took an overnight lighthouse assignment. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there on the edge of the cot, staring at the door. Every small creak in the lighthouse made me jump. Every gust of wind outside made my chest tighten. I kept waiting for those knocks to return. I kept waiting for the handle to turn again, but the hours dragged by in silence. The sky outside slowly lightened, going from pitch black to a faint gray. The waves crashing outside were the only reminder that time was actually moving. My body was exhausted, but my nerves wouldn't let me close my eyes. I felt like if I fell asleep, I'd wake up to someone standing inside the room with me. Would you have dared to close your eyes? Or would you have forced yourself to stay awake, like I did? The sun finally rose. I felt the smallest bit of relief. The shadows weren't so heavy. The hall outside my quarters looked less threatening, but the memory of the night before sat in my chest like a stone. I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. And I needed answers. I grabbed the old landline phone on the desk and dialed the senior keeper. When he answered, his voice was calm, casual, like this was just another morning. Hesitated, then told him everything that happened. The knocks, the handle turning, the silence that followed. On the other end, there was a long pause. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He just stayed quiet for several seconds, and then finally said, "You heard him, didn't you?" The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Like this wasn't a surprise, like he'd heard this story before. What did he mean by him? Who was he talking about? I asked him directly, and he sighed. Then he told me something I'll never forget. Back in the late 1800s, One of the original lighthouse keepers had fallen from the balcony of the lantern room. It was a stormy night, and his body was found the next morning, smashed against the rocks below. According to the old records, he had been working alone when it happened. No one saw him fall. No one heard him scream. Only found him after the waves had already battered his body against the stones. I felt my stomach sink because I knew what was coming next. The senior keeper told me that ever since that night, people who stayed alone in the lighthouse would sometimes hear knocks. Always 3, always slow, and always when they were isolated. Some claimed they heard the knocks at the lantern room door. Others said they came at their quarters, just like I had. But the most unsettling part, some said the doorknob would turn. Like the man was still out there, asking to be let back inside. Could it really be him? Could the spirit of a long-dead keeper still walk that lighthouse, trapped in the place where he died? I didn't know what to say. My throat was dry. I asked the senior keeper if it ever stopped, if the noises ever went away. He was quiet again, then said, "No, not if you're alone. It always comes back." I felt a pit open in my stomach, because I was scheduled to stay there for 2 more nights. 2 more nights, completely alone. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. The lighthouse felt different in daylight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. Like I had stepped into someone else's space, and they wanted me gone. Would you have stayed? Would you have found any excuse to leave right then and there? I tried to busy myself with repairs, checking equipment, tightening bolts, making sure the lantern glass was secure. But all day, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I glanced at the stairs, I half expected to see someone standing there, pale, waiting. That night, when the sun began to sink, dread washed over me. I paced my quarters, too nervous to sit still. I kept a flashlight in my lap and stared at the door, waiting, listening. Every sound made me tense. When midnight came, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag, packed my tools, and locked the quarters behind me. My hands shook as I made my way down the stone steps to the dock. I didn't care if I'd get in trouble for abandoning my post. I couldn't spend another night in that place. But even as I left, I swore I could feel something behind me, watching me from one of the darkened windows high above. Was it just my imagination, or did I really leave him standing there, waiting for the next unlucky soul to come stay alone in that lighthouse? That was the last overnight assignment I ever took. And to this day, when I think about those 3 knocks, I wonder if I had opened the door. What would I have seen standing on the other side? Story to light that wouldn't go out. I used to live in a small coastal town in Oregon. There was an old, decommissioned lighthouse on the cliffside. It hadn't been operational for decades, but people still visited during the day. At night, though, the place was pitch black, except sometimes it wasn't. One evening, while driving home along the coast, I saw the lantern glowing faintly in the distance. The beam swept slowly across the waves, just like it did when it was active. I asked my father about it later, and he said, "That's impossible. There's no power running to it anymore." I grew up in a small coastal town in Oregon. It was quiet most of the time, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and nothing ever really changed. But on the edge of the town, perched on a cliff above the crashing waves, stood an old lighthouse. It hadn't been used in decades. The government shut it down long before I was born. During the day, tourists sometimes visited it. They'd take pictures, walk the cliff trails, and peek through the rusty gates. But at night, the place was abandoned, completely dark. It was just a tall, empty shell standing over the sea. Everyone in town knew it wasn't active anymore. At least, that's what we all thought. One night, I was driving home from a friend's house. The road curved along the coastline, giving a clear view of the cliffs and the lighthouse. I glanced out the window, expecting to see nothing but black ocean and stars. But instead, I saw a faint glow. The lantern room at the top of the lighthouse was lit. The beam slowly swept across the waves, steady and deliberate, just like it had when the lighthouse was active. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't lightning. It was a real, functioning light. I remember my hands tightening on the steering wheel as my chest tightened with confusion. How could that be possible? When I got home, I immediately asked my dad about it. He was sitting in his chair, watching TV. I told him I'd seen the lighthouse lit up again. He barely looked up when he said, "That's impossible. There's no power running to it anymore." The way he said it made me uneasy. He didn't ask questions. He didn't seem surprised. It was like he'd already heard this before. Had other people seen the light too? Were they just ignoring it? I pressed him, asking if maybe the Coast Guard had restored power, or if someone had broken in. But he shook his head. "No one's allowed up there," he said. "It's been locked for years." His tone was final, like he didn't want to discuss it further. It should have been the end of it. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. The light was too real. It wasn't a trick of my eyes. In the beam, it swept across the ocean as if someone was standing up there, keeping watch. So if no one was supposed to be inside, who had lit the lantern? The next few nights, I drove the same road again. Sometimes the lighthouse was dark, but other times the glow returned, a pale orange light, like fire, circling across the sea. Each time I saw it, my chest tightened more, because I knew what my father had said. There was no power. There was no one stationed there, and yet the light kept coming back. Would you have gone up to the lighthouse yourself? Or would you have pretended you never saw it? I couldn't help myself. Curiosity won. A week later, I parked my car near the cliff trail and started walking. The air was cold and damp, filled with the smell of salt water. My flashlight beam wavered as I climbed the path. The sound of the ocean roared below. The lighthouse loomed ahead of me, its white paint peeling, its windows dark and broken. The metal door at the base was chained shut, rusted from years of storms. I pressed against it, but it didn't budge. My flashlight swept across the cracks and crevices. Everything looked abandoned. But when I looked up at the lantern room, I swear, for the briefest moment, I saw movement, shadow, passing behind the glass. My stomach dropped. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of my own beam, but the shape had been too clear. It looked like someone pacing inside. Who could it have been? And how did they get in if the door was still locked? The wind picked up, howling through the cracks in the metal. It almost sounded like voices carried in the air, but I told myself it was just the weather. The ocean boomed below like thunder, spraying mist up the cliffs. Ty stood there, frozen, staring up at the lantern room. Then the light came on. It wasn't bright, not like modern bulbs. It glowed orange, flickering as if it came from fire. My throat went dry as the beam slowly turned and swept across the ocean. The glass panes rattled faintly with each rotation. Someone, or something, had lit it again. Stumbled back, gripping my flashlight tighter. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't look away. My heart was racing, every beat louder than the wind, because I knew what I had just seen. A figure moved again, a silhouette pacing slowly around the lantern. "Kay, would you have stayed to watch? Kay, would you have stayed to watch? Or would you have turned and bolted down the cliffside path?" I stayed frozen, my breath visible in the cold night air. The figure never looked down at me. It just moved slowly, back and forth, like it was trapped in a routine. My chest tightened, and I finally forced myself to step back. Cliffs suddenly felt too empty, too exposed. I ran back to my car, my footsteps slamming against the rocky ground, the sound swallowed by the crashing waves. I didn't stop until I was behind the locked doors of my house. But even then, I couldn't shake the image. It's that faint glow, that figure pacing in the lantern room. The next morning, I told an old fisherman about what I saw. His face paled instantly, and he looked at me like I had just said something forbidden. He shook his head slowly, then leaned closer. He said the lighthouse keeper, who once worked there, had refused to leave when the station was shut down in the 1960s. He stayed alone, night after night, still lighting the lamp by hand, till one stormy winter, he was found dead in the lantern room, slumped beside a shattered oil lamp. And ever since, people in town had whispered about the light, how it would come back on during certain nights, how a figure could be seen pacing, as if he was still keeping watch over the sea. Was it really him, still trapped in the place he refused to abandon? I didn't know what to believe, but every time I drive that coastal road at night, I can't stop myself from looking up at the cliffs. Sometimes it's dark, like it should be, but sometimes I see it, the glow of the lantern, sweeping slowly across the waves. And in those moments, I wonder if I ever climbed back up there, if I ever found a way inside. Would I finally see the face of the man still keeping the light burning? Or would he already be waiting at the bottom of the stairs for me? A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I hiked up the cliff trail to see for myself. The lighthouse stood tall, weather-beaten and empty. The metal door at the base was locked tight with chains, rusted from years of sea air. But when night fell, I swear to God, the lantern flickered to life. Wasn't electric light. It looked more like fiery and orange glow, dancing like an old oil lamp. I just stood there, frozen, watching the light spin across the ocean. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure moving in the lantern room. I don't know what possessed me to go back up there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something darker. But about a week later, I found myself standing at the base of that same cliff trail, staring up at the silhouette of the lighthouse. The air was colder than I remembered. My breath came out in visible clouds, vanishing quickly in the sea wind. My flashlight felt too small in my hand, its beam barely cutting through the darkness ahead of me. Each step on the rocky trail crunched beneath my shoes, echoing far too loudly in the silence. The sound of the ocean below was deafening, waves smashing against the cliffs like distant explosions. The salty mist clung to my face, dampening my hair. Every so often, I stopped and looked over my shoulder, but the path behind me was empty. Just dark, twisting, and silent. Why did I keep going when every instinct told me to turn back? The lighthouse grew taller as I climbed, looming like a giant shadow against the night sky. The tower's paint had peeled almost completely, leaving streaks of blackened stone exposed to the elements. Rust lined every window frame, and the iron railing around the lantern room looked jagged and broken. I swear the place looked more like a tomb than a building. By the time I reached the base, my chest was tight, and my legs felt heavier than they should have. The metal door stood in front of me, chained shut with a massive lock, orange with rust. I ran my hand across it, flakes of paint and corrosion falling onto my skin. The air around the entrance smelled faintly of burned oil, like a lamp that had just been snuffed out. How could that smell even exist here, when no one had been inside for decades? I pressed my ear against the cold metal, holding my breath. For a moment, all I heard was the rush of the wind. Then, faintly, something else, a dragging sound, like footsteps scraping across the floor inside. Slow, uneven. I jerked back immediately, my pulse hammering in my ears. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind pushing against old wood, or maybe rats scurrying across the floorboards. But deep down, I knew it hadn't sounded like that. It had sounded heavier, human. What would you have done if you heard footsteps inside a place that was supposed to be empty? The air suddenly felt colder. I tilted my flashlight up, aiming it toward the lantern room at the top. For a long moment, it was pitch black. The broken glass reflected my beam, sending little flashes back down at me. Then, without warning, the lantern flickered to life. The glow wasn't white, wasn't electric. It was deep orange, pulsing like a flame. The light grew stronger, casting shadows across the rocks, and then it began to move. The beam slowly swept across the ocean, just as it had the night I first saw it. My throat went dry. Someone had just lit that lamp. I couldn't move. My body felt locked in place. The beam circled slowly, illuminating the cliffs, the water, and then me. For a second, it felt like it paused. It's like the light itself was looking directly at me. My heart skipped a beat as I stumbled backward, raising my flashlight in panic. But then, I saw movement. Up in the lantern room, behind the glass, a dark figure shifted. It passed slowly across the room, a silhouette pacing from one side to the other. The glow of the flame outlined its shape, long and human-like, but distorted through the old glass. Was it really a person up there, or something else? I tried to convince myself it was a squatter. Someone who had broken in, living there without anyone knowing. That explanation felt safer. It made sense. But the longer I stared, the less human it seemed. Its movements were strange, too rigid, too slow, like it was going through motions it had repeated 1,000 times before. I swallowed hard, trying to tear my eyes away. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam shaking across the stones. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but something deeper rooted me to the ground. I needed to know if it could see me too. What if it already knew I was there? The figure stopped moving. It stood perfectly still in the center of the lantern room, the light glowing brighter behind it. My stomach turned. It was facing the glass, facing out. It was facing me. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as I slowly lowered my flashlight. The glow from above was enough to see by now, washing the cliff in flickering orange. I was exposed, standing directly in the open. I didn't dare blink. Then the figure moved again, not pacing, not turning away. It stepped closer to the glass. Do you know that feeling when your body tells you to run, but your legs won't listen? That's exactly what happened. I stayed frozen as the shape leaned toward the glass, its outline pressing closer, almost clear enough to make out details. The light behind it flickered again, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a face, hollow, shadowed, watching. I stumbled back, my foot slipping on loose rocks. The sound echoed far too loud in the night. The instant it happened, the figure snapped away from the glass. The lantern flame flared, glowing hotter, brighter, like it was feeding off my fear. And then, as quickly as it had come on, the light went out. Darkness swallowed the cliffs, the lighthouse, and everything around me. The only sound left was the waves below and the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. But I swear, in that black silence, I heard something else, the sound of chains rattling. From the base of the door. The next morning, I mentioned it to an old fisherman at the docks. His face went pale immediately. He told me the story of a lighthouse keeper who refused to leave his post. Even after the lighthouse was shut down in the 1960s, he stayed there alone for months, till one winter storm, he was found dead in the lantern room, his body curled beside a shattered oil lamp. Ever since, people have claimed the light sometimes returns during storms, and if you look closely, you can see his silhouette pacing back and forth. I've driven that road hundreds of times since, and sometimes I still see the glow sweeping across the Black Sea. The morning after my encounter, I went down to the docks. The sea was calm that day, the kind of calm that almost feels wrong, like it's holding its breath. I remember sitting on the edge of the pier, watching the fishing boats rock lazily in the water. That's when I struck up a conversation with one of the old fishermen who worked there. His skin was weathered, cracked from years in the salted sun. His eyes, though, were sharp, like he had seen things the rest of us would never understand. I told him about the lighthouse. I told him about the glow and the figure I thought I had seen inside. At first, he didn't say anything. Kay just looked at me, his expression frozen, his lips tightening into a thin line. Then, slowly, the color drained from his face. His weathered hands gripped the edge of the pier so tight his knuckles turned white. Why did he look so terrified when all I had mentioned was a light? After a long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made me lean in to hear every word. He told me there had once been a lighthouse keeper who lived up there, a man who had given his entire life to the sea and to that tower. When the lighthouse was decommissioned in the 1960s, everyone else left, but not him. He refused. The fisherman said the keeper had been stubborn, obsessed, even. A key wouldn't abandon his post. He stayed in the tower alone through storms, through winters, even after supplies stopped coming. He kept lighting the lamp every night, even though there were no ships left to guide. The town begged him to leave, but he wouldn't. He said the sea still needed him. Could obsession like that keep a man alive longer than he should be? Or could it keep something else alive after he was gone? One night, during the dead of winter, a storm rolled in. It was one of the worst the coast had ever seen. The winds howled like screams, and the waves swallowed entire fishing boats. When the storm cleared, the townsfolk hiked up to the lighthouse to check on him. What they found was something out of a nightmare. The fisherman's voice cracked as he told me this. They had found the keeper's body curled up in the lantern room. His oil lamp was shattered beside him, glass scattered across the floor, and his body was burned in strange patterns, as if he had clutched the flame until the very end. His eyes were wide open, staring out across the sea. The glow of the lantern was gone. But the story didn't end with his death. The old fisherman told me that ever since that night, people swore they could still see the light. Not every evening, not even every storm. But some nights, when the sea was blackest, the lantern would flicker to life again, and if you looked closely, you could see him. His silhouette, pacing back and forth in the lantern room, just as he had when he was alive. Was it really his spirit, still keeping watch? Or was it something else, pretending to be him? I listened, frozen, as the old man warned me. He said the stories had a darker side, that some who saw the light too close, too clearly, didn't come back the same. A few went missing altogether, their boats found drifting at sea. Others claimed the keeper followed them home. They would wake in the night to see the faint orange glow outside their windows, sweeping across their rooms like a searchlight. Would you believe a story like that, or would you laugh it off as nothing more than superstition? I wanted to laugh, wanted to tell him it was ridiculous, but the look on his face made it impossible. His fear was real. His voice shook when he told me never to go back up that trail, never to look too closely at the lantern again. He swore the keeper didn't like being watched, and if he noticed you, he wouldn't stop. My chest tightened as he spoke those words. I remembered the figure in the glass, the way it had leaned toward me, the way the lantern had gone out the moment I stumbled. Is that the keeper? Had he seen me? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window made me jump. The creak of a tree branch against the glass, the howl of the wind down the street. My imagination turned every shadow into that same tall figure, every flicker of passing headlights into the orange sweep of the lantern beam. Was he already watching me, even then? I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just a story, just an old man trying to scare me. As the nights went on, I couldn't shake it. The image of that dark shape pacing in the lantern burned into my mind. And sometimes, when I drove along the coast late at night, I would catch a glimpse of it again, of the glow. It was never constant. Sometimes the lantern was dark, silent, just a broken tower on the cliffs. But other nights, the orange beams swept across the sea. It moved slowly, methodically, just as it had when he was alive. And every time I found myself staring, trying to see if the shadow was still there inside. And each time I swore I did. Was it my imagination filling in the darkness? Or was he really still there, pacing, watching, waiting? I don't drive that road as often anymore, but when I do, I keep my eyes down. I don't let myself look at the cliffs, 'cause I know if I do, I'll see it again. The glow, the shadow, the keeper's light, and the more you look, the closer it gets. Story 3, The Man on the Rocks. When I was in college, A group of friends and I rented a beach house for the summer. Okay? Not far from the property was a small, abandoned lighthouse sitting on a rocky peninsula. One night, after a bonfire, one of my friends, Jake, dared us to hike out there. We grabbed flashlights and made our way across the slippery rocks. Halfway there, we spotted something strange. A man was standing on the rocks near the base of the lighthouse, completely still, facing the ocean. We called out, but he didn't move, didn't even turn his head. When I was in college, a group of friends and I decided to rent a beach house for the summer. It was one of those places right on the coast, the kind where the waves hit the rocks so hard you could feel them through the floorboards. We spent our days swimming, hiking, and drinking coffee while watching the tide. At night, we'd have bonfires on the sand, telling stories and laughing until late. Not far from the property, sitting on a rocky peninsula, was an old, abandoned lighthouse. Its white paint had peeled years ago, and the metal railings were rusted. We had seen it from the house countless times, but it was always distant, uninviting. There was a feeling about it, something quiet and heavy that made me uncomfortable. Did we really think it was just a building? Or was there something in that tower waiting to be seen? One night, after a particularly rowdy bonfire, my friend Jake dared us to hike out there. He said it was totally safe, though we all knew better. We grabbed flashlights, laughing nervously, and started to cross the rocks. The wind whipped salt into our faces, and waves crashed against the cliffs. Each step was slippery, each movement careful, but our laughter didn't hide the tension building in my chest. The rocks were jagged and uneven, wet with tide spray. My boots slipped more than once, and I had to grab onto my friends to keep from falling. The lighthouse grew taller in the distance, its silhouette sharp against the night sky. It looked smaller from the house, but up close, it felt enormous. Something about it made my stomach churn. Was I imagining it? Or was the lighthouse somehow watching us? Halfway there, we noticed something strange. Standing on the rocks near the base of the lighthouse was a man, completely still, facing the ocean, not moving, not even breathing in a way we could see. My flashlight beam landed on him, and for a moment, we froze. His outline was clear against the black rocks and waves. We called out, joking at first, "Hey, you lost or something?" But he didn't move, didn't turn his head, not even the smallest reaction. It was like the air around him absorbed the sound. My voice felt hollow, fading into the wind. What would you have done if someone just stood there like that? Completely unmoving, I felt a chill run through me. The others laughed nervously, but I knew something wasn't right. The man's posture was wrong, too stiff, too deliberate. Even in the dim light, his presence seemed heavy, unnatural. My heart started pounding. Tried to make it a joke, suggested we get closer. "Maybe he's just a statue or something," he said. But I didn't believe him. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, go back to the safety of the beach. As we moved closer, the air grew colder. The wind seemed to shift, blowing more sharply, cutting through our jackets. The sound of waves hitting the rocks grew louder, almost deafening. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath. Would you have kept walking, or stopped, frozen in place, like I did? By the time we were 20 feet from him, I realized something else. It's the man. He had no reflection in the wet rocks beneath him, not a single glimmer. Its darkness surrounding his feet, blending perfectly with the shadowed stones. I wanted to step back, to run, but my legs felt like lead. My friends were laughing nervously behind me, but even their jokes felt hollow. The man remained motionless, staring out at the ocean. Then, the worst part happened. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint sound footsteps, slow, deliberate. But they weren't ours. They were behind us. I spun around, flashlight shaking, but there was nothing there. Only the rocks and the waves, the ocean roaring like it knew a secret. Was someone really behind us? Or was my mind finally snapping? We turned back to the man at the lighthouse. He hadn't moved, but now I noticed his head was slightly tilted, as if listening, not to the ocean, but to us. A sudden sense of wrongness filled me. This was no man. My friend Laura whispered, "We should go now." Her voice was tight, trembling. The others nodded, flashlights bouncing as they backed away slowly. But before we could take a step, the man moved, not with legs, not in a natural way. He just glided forward a few inches. Our lights caught him, and I could see his face for the first time, blank, featureless, like a shadow carved into a body. I screamed. The sound was swallowed immediately by the wind. My friends were shouting too, scrambling backward across the rocks. A boot slipped, my hands scraped against the jagged stone. Every wave felt like it could pull us in. Why did it move? And why did it feel like it knew we were afraid? We ran without looking back, hearts hammering, lungs burning. When we finally reached the beach house, we slammed the door behind us, panting, soaked, terrified. No one spoke for a long time. Later, through trembling voices, we agreed on one thing. None of us would ever go back near that lighthouse at night. But even in the safety of our rooms, I couldn't shake it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure still standing on the rocks, watching the ocean, watching us, waiting. Had we really escaped? Or had we only been invited deeper into something we couldn't yet understand? Creeped out, but trying to act tough, Jake led us up to the lighthouse anyway. The door was hanging off its hinges, and inside was a spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. As we climbed, the air grew colder, and the smell of salt and rot was overwhelming. At the top, the glass panes were cracked and broken, letting the wind howl through. But then we heard footsteps below, slow, dragging steps, climbing the stairs toward us. We shined our lights down the stairwell, but it was empty. That's when we realized the man on the rocks was gone. Creeped out, but trying to act tough, Jake led us up to the lighthouse anyway. The night air was thick with fog, and the wind cut through our jackets like knives. Step across the jagged rocks made me flinch, the surf crashing loudly against the cliffside below. I kept glancing at the lighthouse, its shadow towering over us like a dark sentinel. The door was hanging off its hinges, creaking faintly as it swayed with the wind. Peeling paint revealed wood blackened with age, and rusted metal framed the doorway. Stepping inside, the air hit me like a wave, cold, damp, and reeking of salt and decay. Every breath made my lungs ache as the smell of rot filled my nostrils. Could we really be alone in a place like this? Or was someone or something waiting for us? The spiral staircase wound upward, narrowing as we climbed. The stone beneath our feet was slick, worn smooth from years of use. Our footsteps echoed loudly, bouncing off the curved walls. Shadows twisted along the spiral, making it hard to tell if we were seeing the railing or shapes moving on their own. Jake tried to joke, but his voice cracked. "It's probably just an old lighthouse ghost," he said, forcing a laugh. None of us laughed back. Each step seemed slower than the last, our hearts thumping in our chests. Was that really a ghost, or just our imagination playing tricks in the dark? Halfway up, a gust of wind tore through the cracked walls, howling through the broken windows. It made the metal railings shiver, sending small pebbles sliding down the steps. The sound of the ocean below was deafening, but I swore I could hear something else, a faint, dragging noise. My heart skipped. Something was moving beneath us, slowly, methodically. We froze, pointing our flashlights downward. The beam fell along the spiral stairwell, but the steps were empty. No one, nothing, only the faint swirl of fog that had snuck in from the cracks. Yet the sound continued, soft, deliberate. Footsteps moving upward toward us. I gripped the railing, sweat running down my back despite the chill. My friends' faces were pale, eyes wide. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but we were trapped on the narrow staircase, with no way back except the winding stairs we'd just climbed. Why did the steps sound like they were right behind us, but nothing was there? At the top, the lantern room opened up into a shattered space. Glass panes were cracked, jagged edges jutting in all directions. The wind howled through the broken frames, flinging cold gusts into our faces. The fog outside made the room feel like it was floating in midair, suspended between earth and sky. I tried to focus on the view, the dark ocean below, anything to distract myself from the feeling that we were not alone. But then, something made me look down. The man who had been standing on the rocks was gone. We had been so sure of him earlier, his silhouette clear against the cliffside. And now, nothing. No trace, no movement. Only the sound of our breathing and the wind slicing through the lantern room. Had he vanished, or had we imagined him all along? A chill ran down my spine as I realized the footsteps were louder now, closer, coming up the stairs, slow, dragging, deliberate. My stomach knotted, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Jake shone his light down the stairwell again. Nothing, empty, yet the sound kept moving. I could feel the vibration in the floorboards, a steady, inexorable approach, or what was climbing after us. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. We huddled together near the top, flashlight beams crossing each other nervously. The room felt alive, shadows crawling across the walls. I could feel cold fingers brushing against my skin, though nothing was there. Every creak of the wind, every groan of the structure made me flinch. My legs shook as we tried to back away from the edge of the lantern room. The broken glass glinted in the light, sharp and threatening. Would it hurt us if it reached us? Or was it just watching? A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed against the broken panes, rattling the entire room. My flashlight flickered. The sound of dragging steps paused. Silence. Total silence. And then something shifted behind us. Shadow detached itself from the corner of the lantern room. Too tall, too rigid. It moved just slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a face sword, maybe just a mask staring back at me. Featureless, but with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I stumbled back, nearly falling over the railing. My friends screamed. The figure didn't move much, only leaned slightly forward, as if it had been waiting, watching, calculating. Was it human, or something older than the lighthouse itself? The dragging steps began again, faint this time, as if retreating. Yet the shadow remained silent, motionless. My chest ached, my mind raced. Every hair on my body was standing on end. I knew we were not supposed to be there. We didn't need to speak to know the plan. Leave, now. We backed slowly toward the spiral stairs, trying not to make a sound. Every creak of the broken floorboards echoed like a gunshot. The shadow shifted just slightly again, and I could feel its gaze burning into the back of my head. Could it follow us down? We didn't wait to find out. We ran, feet slipping on stone, hands scraping against the railing. The stairs twisted endlessly, like a nightmare. Every corner we turned, I expected it to be there, waiting. The wind seemed to push against us, slowing our progress, mocking our fear. I could feel my pulse in my temples. The cold sweat stung my eyes. Then we reached the bottom. The door, the broken entryway. We stumbled outside into the foggy night. The rocks below were empty. The man, the shadow, nothing. We didn't stop running until we were back at the beach house, hearts hammering, lungs burning. None of us spoke for a long time, even in the safety of four walls. The wind howled like the lighthouse itself was calling us back. Would we ever see that shadow again? Or had it been just a warning? I haven't gone near that lighthouse since. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in from the ocean, I swear I hear those dragging steps, just outside, waiting. And every time, I wonder, was it really there that night? Or is it still up there, standing in the darkness, watching the cliffs? waiting for someone else to climb the stairs. Panic set in. We bolted down the stairs, ran out onto the rocks, and aimed our flashlights everywhere. Nothing, just crashing waves and darkness. But as we turned to head back, I froze, because standing on the path behind us, blocking the way home, was that same figure. He was closer now, his face pale and blurred, like seawater was dripping down his skin. We ran without looking back, slipping on the rocks until we reached the beach house. None of us spoke for the rest of the night. The next morning, I asked a local about the lighthouse. He shook his head and said, "People see him sometimes. It's the man who drowned near those rocks. He always comes back, watching, waiting." Panic set in immediately. We bolted down the spiral stairs, our footsteps echoing against the cold stone. Each step was slippery, slick with moisture, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The wind howled through the broken windows, whipping our hair into our faces and carrying the faint smell of salt and decay. We reached the bottom and tumbled out onto the jagged rocks. My flashlight beam darted wildly, cutting through the fog, illuminating the slick surfaces and jagged edges. The waves crashed violently below, the water splashing high enough to spray our faces. Our breaths came in short, panicked gasps as we searched for any sign of that figure. Why did my stomach feel so heavy, like something was pressing down on me? Nothing moved. No footsteps echoed behind us. No shadow shifted on the rocks, only the crashing waves, the mist, and the endless dark. Yet every instinct screamed at me that we were not alone. My skin prickled. My eyes darted to every shadow, every uneven shape in the rocks. Was I imagining it? Or was he already closer than I realized? As we turned to head back toward the beach house, I froze. My flashlight slipped in my hand as I caught sight of him, standing on the narrow path behind us, motionless, blocking our way. My chest tightened. My throat went dry. He was closer now, too close. The fog curling around him made him appear to float slightly above the rocks. His face, pale and blurred. It looked like seawater was dripping down his skin, obscuring his features. The orange glow from the lighthouse lantern nor. Maybe my imagination outlined him in a haunting haze. We didn't wait to figure it out. We ran, stumbling, sliding on the slick rocks. My hands scraped against jagged surfaces. My knees hit sharp edges. The others were yelling, but their voices were swallowed by the roar of the ocean. Behind us, I could hear nothing but the faintest echo of footsteps. Were they real? Or had the night swallowed the sound completely? The path seemed endless. Every step forward brought us closer to the beach house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was gliding, effortlessly keeping pace behind us. Each time I risked a glance back, I saw the same pale, blurred face. Not moving like a normal man, but somehow always just far enough behind to terrify us. The wind screamed in my ears, but the sound behind me, soft, dragging, relentless, made me certain he was there. We reached the sand finally, the familiar sight of the beach house looming ahead. Relief surged through me, only to be cut short by the memory of the figure. I risked one final glance. He was gone. The path was empty. Only darkness and the faint shimmer of moonlight on wet rocks remained. None of us spoke for the rest of the night. Even inside, behind locked doors, the sound of the waves seemed too loud. The wind rattled the windows, carrying the smell of salt and something older, something foul. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to twist unnaturally. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking I saw him in the corners of the rooms, just beyond the reach of the light. Was he waiting for us to fall asleep? Morning came reluctantly, gray and foggy. My body ached from the run, my skin still prickling. I left the house first and walked to the nearest dock, hoping the day would wash away the terror of last night. I found a local fisherman mending nets and asked about the lighthouse. His eyes narrowed. He shook his head slowly. His hands, rough and weathered, paused mid-motion. People see him sometimes, he said, voice low, almost a whisper. The man who drowned near those rocks, he always comes back, watching, waiting. I felt the blood drain from my face. The story sounded familiar, almost too familiar. The way he described the figure, the blurred, pale face, the endless return. Could it be the same man we had seen last night? The fisherman looked away, scanning the horizon as if expecting to see the figure appear. I followed his gaze. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, still and silent. Yet I could almost feel eyes on me, just out of reach, waiting for the fog to carry him closer. I wanted to leave. I wanted to drive far from the coast, never to return. But some part of me couldn't look away. Even later, in the safety of my room, I saw him again. Not clearly, just a shadow slipping past the edge of the window. A glimpse of that pale, blurred face reflected in the dark. Was he haunting the lighthouse? Or was he haunting me now? I never went back. None of us did. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the wind whistles like the ocean itself is speaking, I swear I hear him, standing silently on the path, waiting, watching, and every time I ask myself would I see him again if I went back, or would I regret it the moment I stepped onto the rocks. These were 3 disturbing, true lighthouse horror stories. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.